Away, it's an all-new Osage Health Watch. With your hosts, Brandy Lemon and Michael Bristow. I'm Mike Quinata, senior editor and co-host. Join us as we delve into Indigenous health issues and share insights on Western medicine and traditional practices, and connect you with resources available from the Osage Nation. We'll also feature practical fitness and nutrition tips from Coach Kinsley, host of the Fitness Fix podcast, all to promote well-being in the Osage Nation, Indigenous communities, and communities around the world. The views and opinions expressed here are those of Greyhawk Enterprise, LLC,
and do not represent the official policy or position of the Osage Nation government.
The statements expressed in the Osage Health Watch should not be construed as the official stance of the Osage Nation or any of its departments, boards, or commissions. On this episode, Osage Health Watch was invited to the Oklahoma Tribal Financial Consortium by Victor Flores, where we interviewed Lindsay King, formerly of the Indian Health Services Oklahoma City region, who served as the lead health compactor. We also discussed what the future of elder care might look like in Indian country, touching on some of the mental health aspects for caregivers.
We are breaking it down live at the Osage Casino and Hotel in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Brandy, how are you feeling about that?
I'm feeling pretty good. Hawaii.
Hawaii. We're Dahe Mingshe.
Dahe Mingshe.
So welcome to the Osage Tribal Financial Consortium. We're here in beautiful Tulsa, Oklahoma, in the beautiful Tulsa Osage Casino
And Hotel.
Beautiful Osage Casino and Hotel. They are kind enough to host our burgeoning little podcast. We were able to rope well, that's probably not the right word.
Convince.
We were able to bribe Lindsay.
We were able to bring in Lindsay King, formerly of the Indian Health Services. What was the branch you were on?
I was with the Oklahoma City area the last part of my career.
And now an employee of the Osage Nation. So we will talk about her journey here. Then we will talk with hosts Mike and Brandy.
So I'm very excited to have Lindsay King as our first guest on the podcast because she has a plethora of experience working with the Oklahoma City area office of the Indian Health Service. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Mike. Pleasure to be here.
I appreciate everyone coming in. Mike, you coming in from Missouri. When I heard that you were coming to work for Osage Nation, I actually stopped and just was like, are you serious? Just because I know that you have grown up there, that what you can bring to and for us, and how you can help us better understand how to navigate Indian country with healthcare.
Thank you, Brandy. That really warms my heart. It is really a pleasure to be here. It felt really divine. I don't know how it all kind of worked out. I've been with IHS for 18 years.
And a big shout out to Victor Flores, president of the Oklahoma Tribal Financial Consortium, for allowing us to be here today to share Lindsay's story with you guys. So, Lindsay, tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to the path that you're on now. When you work for government, you're definitely serving the people, because the pay for government isn't why people join. Sometimes it's the job they can get, but when you're in it for a long time, then you certainly have a passion for doing what you're doing, more than just a cog in a wheel. To be in it as long as you've been in this takes a certain amount of dedication. I appreciate the service you've brought. Tell us what kind of led you down this path. Where did you grow up?
I am from a very rural part of Cherokee County, in the heart of the Cherokee Nation. I'm from Lost City, Oklahoma. So I know there's probably many Oklahomans that are going, Lost City, where's that? It would show up on the screen sometimes if we were getting tornado warnings out that way. So the town where I went to high school in still doesn't have a stoplight, so very rural. For me, I was born in the Indian Health Service. I was born in one of two federal hospitals, IHS-operated hospitals. I was born in Claremore. We grew up on the banks of the 14 Mile Creek. growing up there, we had a K through 8 school. We had a tribal Head Start. Cherokee Nation had a Head Start. I'm a Cherokee Nation citizen. Everything was done in the community. Mom and Dad worked in town. And, you had church and school and friends and sports and everything just right there in the community. I went to Northeastern State University, and after some time spent in an English major, decided that business might be a little better choice for me, maybe give me some more marketability. I was thinking, what am I going to do other than teach?
Hey, now, I was an English major.
Okay.
I was an English major, but then
I knew I liked you.
But then I went back and got my MBA. So, yes,
Yeah.
I agree that
Same.
business was probably a better way to go. But
Same.
give it
I
up
was
for the
just
English
thinking-
majors.
Yeah. And I remember I made the mistake of going and seeing an advisor right before the lunch hour. He goes, well, what do you want to do? And I tell you what I don't want to do. I don't want to sit in an office and do math all day. Well, it's very ironic because that's a large part of my career is doing, not math, but, finance work, so which I love, which I absolutely love. So never count yourself out of things. But the long and short of it, I did get a business degree from Northeastern State University, and I had a little lady from my community. She had come knocking on my door one night, and she said, hey, I heard about this job with the Indian Health Service in Nashville. I think you'd be perfect for it. And I said, what is the Indian Health Service in Nashville going to want with me? I'm brand new, don't have that kind of experience. But I told myself, well, if I apply, and she really encouraged me, I thought, if I apply and I get it, then I'm going. And lo and behold, I remember where I was standing when they offered me that job, almost 18 years ago to the date, actually, and I took it. There began my adventure and career with the Indian Health Service, and I remember a truck comes and moves me. I moved to Nashville, made that journey, and moved away from everything I'd ever known. My dad and my grandpa followed me, and then they turned around and left. I remember seeing them get on the interstate. We had left Waffle House, and I thought, well, I can go home and unpack, or I can go home and cry. And I decided to go home and unpack. And I just never looked back. I threw myself into that work. I absolutely loved it. I have just such a place in my heart for that area and the tribes that I served there. I was fortunate enough to have an opportunity to get my MBA while still working, continue to work in IHS, and I made some amazing friends, had some incredible experiences, and really got to see healthcare being delivered to Native people, even for the very first time. We worked with a lot of tribes that had been newly federally recognized, and wow, what an amazing thing to be a part of. As Brandy and I were sitting here talking about watching that and being engaged in that, those experiences, just incredible moments.
You've always had the wherewithal to take risks, to pivot. So when you were going through the business program at Northeast, what in your brain said, this is what I'm going to do when I graduate? And what was that going to be?
I didn't know. The natural inclination was, well, I'll see if Cherokee Nation's hiring, if they have a place for me, right? Because that's what I knew.
So you were comfortable with that, and you wanted to go back and serve.
Absolutely. I wanted to serve Indian people, and I did not realize, growing up in Lost City is a predominantly Cherokee community, I didn't realize, had no idea really what Indian country really was. Getting those experiences and seeing, I was from a large tribe. In Nashville area, we had so many smaller tribes and their issues, and we had removed tribes that were still in some part of their original homelands. You had small tribes, larger tribes, you had different government structures, and because of their geography, they had different issues. And so I was just so grateful, and there was just a whole world out there that I really had no idea existed. I didn't know. You don't know what you don't know.
So clearly the Cherokee Nation left an imprint on you, that you thought, you know what, I can go out and I can serve other tribes, or I can serve the Cherokees, or what was it about your upbringing that really kind of left that? Did you come from a big family, and what was it about that experience that really kind of pointed you in that direction?
Yeah, I would say my grandparents were very, very instrumental in my life, and I always saw their generosity and them giving back, even when maybe they didn't have that much to give. Giving is not just about money, as we know. Giving is about your compassion, your empathy, your desire to help, to give a hand up to someone in need, no matter what that need might be. Sometimes maybe it's just a hug, an encouraging word, and guidance to our youth, or sharing that knowledge base that you have, or as we talked about earlier, Brandy and I, before this got started, advocacy, sharing with them the experience you have to navigate through a health system that they're unfamiliar with. Public service is near and dear to my heart in many ways. I'm fortunate. My husband, OJ, is a Muskogee Creek and Cherokee citizen, and he shares that same spirit. And so I'm very thankful we're raising our daughter Landry in a home where we have a responsibility to our fellow natives in Indian country and in society, as human beings. So that's really important to us.
Giving back is important to you. So then somebody in your community told you about this IHS position. What was the position? What'd you start out doing?
I started out working in the tribal office, but I was a public health analyst in that position.
Okay.
Started out, at the bottom of the government barrel, so to speak, and worked my way up from there.
So, Lindsay, you talked about your natural instinct to use your education to go to work for the Cherokee Nation. It's commendable that you decided to work for just natives and as a whole and go to work for Indian Health Service and basically work for all 39 tribes here in Oklahoma.
Well, I appreciate that, Mike. I really was very fortunate to have the opportunity to really explore Indian country in a really unique way in my position with Indian Health Service. We sort of had a short bench, and so there was a kind of a lot of plugging that I was able to do in different areas, was able to be exposed to, again, the varying types of tribal governments, the varying types of tribal populations, their geographic needs, their resource needs, and really their successes. And I think that was really what I was astonished by in so many ways, is just the resiliency that I'd seen in my own community and that we've seen in our own home even, but really see that amplified throughout Indian country in so many ways in their health systems. Seeing them maybe have a small trailer, and I always said there's nothing wrong with small trailers. I came from one myself. Good things come from small trailers, but to come back and see these huge clinics and administration buildings, and just to really see that success, not just in the health outcomes, but then in the physical structures and the expansions of programs and the access to care. And now all of a sudden they've got an MRI. Where are they going to put the MRI? Well, they're going to cut the roof of this building off, and then they're going to lower it down into it, and these really amazing things. It's very, very fortunate to have these opportunities.
I think it's very interesting, Lindsay, that you started out with the idea that I'm going to eventually at some point in time, where my plan is to work for my people. That's exactly what I said when I was in nursing school. Because they ask you, why do you want to be a nurse? When you're in the interview process, you feel like that's a loaded question, because you feel like there's a wrong answer. There's really not a wrong answer. They just really want to know where your passion might be, or what avenue you might want to take whenever you do leave nursing school. And I just remember telling them, I want to work for my people. I knew what that meant, but I don't think they knew what that meant. And I didn't work for my people initially. So now that you have kind of gone full circle almost, and you're not necessarily working for Cherokee Nation, but you're going to work for Osage Nation, that was an interesting step. And we visited earlier about how you actually ended up, and we were so lucky to have you come join us. How did that all align?
Appreciate that, Brandy, because I think I felt the same way about those questions. There was always that passion, and those are my people. I wasn't a kid that grew up thinking about leaving home like some kids did. Home was my home, and that's where my family was, and that's where my nation was, and my culture was, and my identity was so tied to that geographic location, right? Home, and all that it meant for me. I found that home is with all the interactions that I've had. I feel at home when I'm with the Wampanoag tribe. I never thought I would be, and staying in Martha's Vineyard with them. I feel at home with these people. I feel at home with the warmth that I've been received with in Indian country. So I've been so thankful for that, because I was thinking about that, just about like what home, when you say like, that's I think I was going to go with, that's my identity,
yeah,
right?
I know what you're trying to say, because when I met some Oneidas, they were talking about when they come down to Grey Horse, how they just feel like they're coming home, even though it's so far from home. Their actual physical home, but because of the hospitality and the warmth and the acceptance, I don't even know if it's acceptance, it's just understanding.
That's right.
That warmed my heart to know that we were able to make them feel so comfortable that they would want to use the word home when explaining visiting another tribe.
Yes, that is home. I said there's this knowing, without saying anything. You just know who each other is. For me, going back to that identity, as a Native woman, I knew that I wanted to be a part of serving Indian country in some way, whether that meant for my own Cherokee people or Native people. I wanted to be able to serve, and I again have just been so blessed with the amazing opportunities Indian Health Service gave me over these past almost 2 decades now. But when this opportunity came along with Osage Nation, I was at a point sort of mid-career, and really over the last couple years just kind of, okay, what does that look like for me, right? And what does the next phase and the next chapter look like? When this opportunity came along, I just felt a sense of peace come over me. And I just knew the path. That's the answer. That's where you're meant to be. And I had a friend years ago that would always say that, we are where we're meant to be. And in that moment, that's where I'm supposed to be. It just was like that. And so I am just so appreciative of Congress, of Chief Standing Bear, of Mr. Rogers, of those that have embraced me and welcomed me home. And I'm so, so thankful to be here with Osage Nation and the health system.
Well, we're very glad that you're here. Lindsay, I did want to pick your brain about a couple of issues here. In the last podcast, I did report that we're in the midst of planning for an assisted living facility. And one of the questions that I get asked from a lot of people, why doesn't Indian Health Service have elder care services like that? Why did they not have an assisted living facility that are created by them and for not just one specific tribe, but for all tribes? Why did they not have that?
Unfortunately, Mike, it's an issue of funding, as is usually always the case with Indian Health Service, right? And that unmet need. And that's really what it comes down to. It is not for a lack of awareness that is such a needed service. It is not for a lack of want or drive to offer that. But really, it's a lack of funding, we find.
I really appreciate this line of conversation because it doesn't necessarily single out Native Americans. We know that it's there. You mentioned that. We are aware that we need this service, and it's needed across all races. We know
Absolutely.
this because we're living longer.
Absolutely.
And we know that it is a need. And so the question that I really have, and it's not really for anyone, it's more rhetorical, is when will that discussion start to take hold in our U.S. Congress?
Yeah, Brandy, I think you hit on that. It's not a lack of awareness, it's a lack of funding priorities. There is a large generation of people, the baby boomers, who are now turning 80, and that funding awareness, that funding priority is starting to come to bear.
I read a study that was looking at the cost of elder care in this country and how it's building each year. And they projected there's going to come a time when the cost of elder care is going to not only equal, but then surpass even the budget for defense of the United States.
And that's because it's now becoming a priority because the people who have the purse strings are now turning old. We see how that changes things. And what I'm hoping it will happen is that it will then put in resources that can address the next generation that's going to turn that age, which are the Gen Xers, of which I am a member. And then, by then the millennials will be in our spot. And so it's sort of like these baby boomers are kind of leading us there. We just need to make sure that we keep that structure in place as we get that age as well.
Yeah, that's why we wanted to put the infrastructure in place with our tribe to have that resource available. And I can only see it growing from there. Part of the Chief's 25-year plan, that came about from a survey of tribal members and what they wanted from their government. And one of them was an elder care service. And we put that into effect as planning for this assisted living facility.
So, Lindsay, and I want to give a shout out to those out there who are getting their post-secondary degree while they're working, while they have a family, while they're trying to take care of their parents and younger generation. It is a hard thing to do, to put all that time in, work nights, but the payoff is worth it. So as a fellow English major turned Masters of Business Administration graduate, Lindsay, I commend you on that because it is a hard row to hoe.
It is, Mike. And you kind of took me back to when I was working on my master's. My dad suffered a stroke, and since then he's suffered a second one, and it's been pretty debilitating. There are people in society every day that are just, as you said, they're working full-time jobs. They're caring for their grandparents, their parents, their children. Many of us become multi-generational caregivers way earlier in life than we ever anticipated, and there's a lot to juggle there. When I look at success, and I grew up, my husband and I are of a really unique generation where we grew up with a lot of federal presence in our programs and within our nations. Chief Mankiller, who was the principal chief of the Cherokee Nation, the first female chief in modern day history, was just an incredible advocate in so many ways and really taught us all about what grassroots really means in Indian country. And I saw Chief Mankiller begin to change that, right? I got to see that. I got to feel that. I got to be a part of that. I got to experience that. I got to be impacted by that. And clearly it was profound. And we got to see that success. And I think I've tried to share with, especially, with my non-Native friends across the country and in my travels and different places that we've lived, is that look to the tribes. They are really doing it best. They're investing in their health. They're investing in their youth. They're investing in prevention. They are respectful of their elders, investing in them in a way that is caring for their traditions, caring for them as though they have a future. I think sometimes elders get to a certain point and some communities just sort of dismiss them. And they still have dreams and plans and goals. How can we help them get there? Because it's so rewarding. If you just sit down and I get a little choked up. I just lost my grandfather in May.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank you. He was an incredible man. I miss that. I just miss being able to talk to him and learn from him. And he would have been so excited. And we continue to talk about that. My husband and I, that's a big conversation. He would have been so excited about this opportunity with Osage Nation. And he was so connected to Osage County for a lot of reasons in Pawhuska. And I drive through those hills and the sun's coming up and I think of him. It's just a blessing to be here. But that connection with our elders runs so deep in all of us. They are who we are.
As Native communities, we're so tied to the past. We're hungry for knowledge of the past. The elders of each respective tribes, they all represent our closest link to our past, our traditions, our way of life. We want to live, we identify as natives, we want to live as natives, and we can only do that from learning from our elders. Lindsay, you do come from IHS, overseeing the whole tribal healthcare in the nation. There are going to be a lot of people wanting you to use that expertise to help us.
I think it's important for our folks to get to know her. Because there's going to be a lot of weight on your shoulders.
Well, I don't want to talk too much.
No.
either.
You're the guest on the podcast. And that's why I'm so excited about you coming to work for us and actually being on the podcast. People do have to get to know you. And that's what we want. So don't worry about it.
I mean, seriously.
And when you hear it, it'll be fine.
Okay.
It'll be fine.
Yeah, he fixes it all up.
Okay.
He's going to edit the crap out of it.
He really does. No, he does.
I'm an editing mofo.
What do you think is going to be the natural follow-up to that assisted living thing? Because there's no funding. There's no funding.
Because you asked, why doesn't IHS do it? And you're like, because we don't have the money. Because it's not a funding priority now for people who are turning that age.
But it is a priority for us, and that's why the tribes have taken it upon themselves to...
Right, and you talked about the infrastructure.
Right, to provide that.
That's a lot of the questions we're going to get. If there's a financial burden, and insurance just won't even pay for it, unless you're Medicare or Medicaid, which, that's if you're disabled, then of course you get assisted living paid for. The thing is we're talking about it, and money has been appropriated for an assisted living. The census that was completed through Osage Nation, our own census, indicated housing was a major need. And assisted living is a form of housing, would be within our, boundaries. I think we're going to get a lot of questions about if it's a financial burden, how are we going to navigate that financial burden? And we don't know what we don't know.
Without the help from IHS. Yeah. How are we going to help fund that without the help from IHS? Because
our government's going to have to fund it. Osage Nation's going to have to fund it until you all are sustainable. But I don't think people understand the part about assisted living. If we ever get to that point of actually breaking ground on it, deciding on a design or building it in phases, however,
right.
whatever's going to happen.
We're not a privately held company. The vast majority of assisted living, skilled nursing, they're all privately held. A lot of them are being taken over by private equity firms. It's a practice that they call harvesting companies. Okay, what they'll do is they'll buy a company and then they'll run up debt to where it's not a solvent company anymore, where they have to declare bankruptcy, they have to kick out all the residents, and then what they end up doing is selling the property to a developer when that was their goal all along. Tribes are in a unique situation in that we're not owned by any company. You can't buy the company out from under us. You can't sell the land because the land is not sellable. And we don't have to provide income for shareholders of the company, for owners of the company. There's going to be no owners of the company, so we don't have that financial burden on us. All we have to do, seriously, is to be solvent, to break even.
That's the goal, right? In that.
Well, I mean, you would hope that would be sustainable. if you can just break even, that was what I would think would be the goal, is that you at least you break even. You really hit it out of the park for me when you put it in this perspective, when you said there is not going to be a board of shareholders or owners requiring payment. Because that's a big question, is how are people going to be able to afford to stay? Because what they know is they go and they call an assisted living place or a nursing home or a skilled nursing home and say, how much does it cost for a month's stay? And they charge by the day. And, right now, Green Country Care Center in Tulsa charges $204 a day.
Yeah.
So some of the fear is that how are we going to be able to maintain and sustain and keep the doors open without asking them to dig in their pockets for their care?
That's the challenge. That is the challenge. Okay, because if you look at the numbers, okay, and I pull this off the internet, okay, so in Oklahoma, the average monthly cost for assisted living is $4,888, and it can range anywhere from $4,573 in Oklahoma City to being in a rural setting at $5,550, like around in the Enid area. So it is daunting, okay, but it is something that is needed, and the need is only going to increase.
What's interesting is assisted living has not been defined by Osage Nation.
They have not, okay, but that is the current project that's before us.
It is, but the majority of the way that you guys are going to be able to break even is that you're going to have a lot of skilled patients.
Well, the model that we're looking at, an aging in place practice, and which is not a current practice of the elder care system in Oklahoma or in the United States. What we want to do is we want to provide a room for them for assisted living, which we know the need is going to increase, can then change to skilled nursing, which then can even morph into hospice care. And they're staying in the same location. Because working with elderly patients in geriatrics, one of the primary factors of their discomfort is their change of environment, because they all want to be home. So in the current system, they go from their home to assisted living, to a separate skilled nursing, and then to an even separate still hospice care. That's a lot of trauma for a person to go through, especially at the ending stages of their life.
It is, and then especially when they're dealing with that on top of excruciating pain from an illness that they may be battling, cancer, for instance, or something. It's agonizing to watch, and you're doing everything you can to advocate and to care and to ease that discomfort and that pain, but
I don't want to sound discouraging in my comments in the sense of, how are we going to sustain this? I definitely know that we as Native people, we cherish our children and we cherish our elders. And there's really not a price that you can put on either, because they are our past and they are our future. And that connection is sometimes lost when a person who ages feels like they are no longer valuable. And knowing that we have a strategic plan and knowing that we've had this census done, which anyone can go and look at the results. It's on our website, Osage Nation's website. Knowing that housing is important to people and elder care is important to people, I don't see how we don't go down this road.
Well, we kind of have to.
It won't be easy.
And you're right. And you bring up a very basic question. Yes, how are we going to pay for it? Let's look at some of the success that we've had. Okay, we just opened a new senior housing complex outside of Hominy, which had 20 units, okay, and it's already full. It's already full. There's already a 2-year waiting list. So I think that in and of itself demonstrates that the need is there, and that to borrow from Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will come.
There's a waiting list in all 3 districts at this point in time, even though we just opened the new senior housing in Hominy. So we know that the housing need is there, and when those elders move to the senior housing and or the assisted living that we eventually hope to have, that opens up other homes for other people to start moving in for jobs that we have here in Osage County. And I know that's a big topic for a lot of people, is I want to come back and work for my people, but there's no housing available. So these are ways that we can help to take a little bit of the pressure off of trying to build large subdivisions. I know that's what some places like to do by offering these types of alternative homes. Some people might not ever use it, and there's nothing wrong with that. Aging in place would truly mean staying in your home and being taken care of by your family. And I know what that looks like. I know that assisted living isn't the be-all, end-all answer for everyone. And so I hope we don't forget along the way the folks that need and want to stay in their home and be taken care of by their families. is important to respect their decisions if they're able to stay in their homes. There's times when they can't. There's times it just is not plausible based off of
definitely.
behavior or the patient's need.
In my practice as a speech pathologist, I have this conversation with the children of affected adults with, and especially dementia. They reach a point where they require more and more and more care, and it overwhelms the family to a point where they require more care than the family can provide. That's why we have places like this, to fill that kind of need. If your family is large enough that you can take care of them in their home, that's great. We want you to do that. But we need to have a safety net measure to cover the tribal members that can't do that.
So, Lindsay, what has been your experience when you were with IHS, sort of in this area, and in general, the process of dealing with, a larger issue like this? That's something that is universally affecting all tribes, all generations, whether it's a younger family member taking care of an older family member, or just seeing, how overwhelming this can be. When you were at IHS, how is that dealt with, and how is that looked at, and what's been your experience with that in your old position?
I appreciate the question. My experience has been firsthand in that while working in Indian Health Service and managing the role, the responsibility, timelines, deadlines, budgets, staff, data calls, and all the things, while managing my grandfather, who was at end of life and who was in an incredible amount of pain, and the struggle of navigating care within various health systems, and then trying to get pain managed at a time he was not on hospice. And that's very difficult in that, and advocating, recognizing that facilities, whether that be hospitals or a skilled nursing or long-term care, are short-staffed. And that can result in, he fell one night. I get a call at 10 o'clock and he's fallen. I hadn't left but an hour and a half before that. And so there's those things that I think many of us have dealt with really on a first-hand basis. So while we see it, it's never more profound than when you're in it yourself. And my grandmother also had a stroke. My dad's had 2 strokes. My brother, thank God, he's an absolute miracle. He was in a horrific head-on collision and needed an incredible amount of care. You just stop and you do what needs to be done, but the world around you doesn't stop, right? So you got to keep managing that. And exhausting probably isn't the word for it, because that means so many things. You're emotionally exhausted. You're not even talking about. We're talking about resources and navigating health systems, and you're not even talking about the pain of watching your loved one go through these things and having to learn to walk again, or maybe the future is not there and having to learn how are you going to communicate that to that person, and what are those final weeks and days look like. And I wish, if funding weren't an issue, these things would be issues, but they wouldn't be as magnified as they are, right?
And I think one thing you've kind of touched on there is the mental health aspect of those family caregivers, and how later on that affects them deeply. Being able to address that as well. I mean, are there resources available for that, or is that a coming crisis that we've got to navigate as well? I mean, we are, as in Generation X, late baby boomers, are the ones, and Mike alluded to this earlier, of putting this infrastructure in place. Is that something else that we need to talk about, is the mental health aspect?
Mike, we absolutely should touch on mental health and healthy minds almost every podcast, in the sense of it is a line within all of our lives. It's choices that we make based off of coping mechanisms that we either have or we don't have, or they're poor coping mechanisms. When you're speaking about caregiver fatigue, that's really what I hear you saying in the mental health realm concerning elder care. It's a diagnosis. It is not anything to take lightly, just like depression and anxiety are not anything to take lightly. It's a traumatic event that a lot of people don't accept as trauma. They carry it as guilt, which is a form of trauma. Knowing that you have an outlet, whether it be through respite care, whether it be through in your loved one having to go to assisted living or skilled nursing or to a nursing home, you still have caregiver fatigue, even if they are taken care of by somebody else, because of the guilt that you carried because you did care for them, and then overcoming that guilt. I really feel that a lot of our problems, not just elder care. In our past podcasts, we've talked about diabetes and coping mechanisms and making choices and habit stacking and doing small short-term goals for habit stacking. I really feel like it's so important in each thread, and I'm so glad you brought this up, Mike, to talk about mental health and healthy minds. And I know that a lot of people have a stigma when we want to talk about mental health illness, but let's talk about healthy minds. We could reframe it. We want to talk about, we choose not to use the word diet. We want to talk about healthy choices. The same thing goes for our mental health or our healthy mind. I'm really glad that you brought this up, Mike, because I feel like it should be a requirement that the individuals in the whole entire care team are looking at not only the elder or the elder couple that is receiving care, but the individuals that are attached to those people, and not just main caregivers. This can pass down through historical trauma, because there are times when you have an elder grandparent who might be living with their children, who then are also raising their grandchildren, which would be the great-grandchildren of the elder who needs help. And they're seeing this. They're going through this. And to them, that's normal. But what if the coping mechanisms that the parents and grandparents are utilizing actually are very more traumatic? And what that looks like down the road, that's what I think mental health and healthy minds concerning elder care at this point is going to show up in 10 or 20, maybe 30 years in some of these great-grandchildren that are living with their great-grandparents while being taken care of in the sandwich generation. It's actually a double-stack sandwich, if you want to talk about it like that.
Brandy, that's a great point, because at the clinic, we noticed that mental health became a real issue with the beginning of COVID, with the isolation that everybody felt, with the disruption of their daily lives. That really did put a strain on a lot of people. And the way we dealt with it at the clinic was we began to use telehealth services for mental health. And that has kind of really turned into a great thing. You're right that the generations coming up, losing their parents, losing their grandparents. And there is a lot of caregiver fatigue. In fact, we call it caregiver burnout. We try to talk to our patients' children about that, in that they need to spread the care around. Because if just one person takes care of somebody, they're neglecting their own health, their own physical health, their own mental health. And there are times when that caregiver passes away before the patient does. And who is left to continue the care? That's a scenario that we want to avoid.
We could go on talking about this for a few podcasts, in all honesty, just because of the enormity of how much care it does take and what kind of pressure it puts on society. And I'm not meaning in a negative way. We need to be able to talk about it in a way that there is a solution. It's just not going to be easy. It's going to be tough to get there and to get people to buy into it. The poor choices that people make too when you just get tired. Prime example, I've been working pretty hard, with normal stuff at home, but also I've had an extra little duty with being in session lately, and I fell off of some of my little short-term goals. I went to eating poorly again. I haven't been getting up in the mornings and doing my little bit of, movement and exercise. Failed miserably. We're tackling a very, very difficult subject, elder care. The whole entirety of the elder care. This is a very difficult.
It's every hard thing that you could ever talk about. Emotions, fatigue, burnout, financial means, fear.
Disruption of life.
Disruption of life.
There's a thing that really does exist. It happens with the frequency enough that they've named it, and it's called granny dumping.
That's terrible.
It is terrible, but it happens when the patient, usually of dementia, and they reach a point where they need help with everything in life. And the family, the caregivers can't take it anymore, and what they do is they take them to an emergency room, they leave them in a wheelchair, and then they just leave. And the ER has to take care of them, but they have no way of knowing who they are, who this patient is, what family they are. They just have to take care of them because they can't turn them away. They have to take care of them until the family eventually returns. There have been cases where it's been like a month and the family finally comes back to retrieve the loved one. But it happens. Desperation will cause you to do desperate things. And we don't want that to be the case.
You know, that sounds just absolutely awful. However, I could see another side where the safety and the security of that grandmother or that grandfather was at risk, and that caretaker knew that they were at their wits' end. Just like when a hospital is used as a safe place where you can leave an infant because of the amount of care that an infant takes, and you can leave the infant and walk away, no questions asked. I thought about that immediately when you started telling this story, and I can empathize with someone who made that choice if they were like my grandmother. I was at my wits' end and I was afraid that I was going to hurt her.
And that's what it comes down to. It really does. I mean, it is a terrible situation, but it happens. And what we want to do is we want to take every measure to where that doesn't happen.
Michael, is there legislation, is there laws that are broken when you do something like that? The only reason I'm asking is because I suspect that that's where we're headed. And not with Osage Nation. I'm talking about U.S.
No, in general, yeah. In the article that I read, there's not really any broken laws. They call it elder abandon, but they're leaving them at a hospital. So the patient is still receiving the care that they need every day. They're just receiving it from someone else.
And the financial burden will then still be on that family and that patient. So they caused themselves, even though they might have helped the patient not get hurt, they still caused another type of burden on themselves with the financial piece of it.
And the guilt that you spoke of earlier, of course, that's going to play into it as well.
You know, you mentioned type 3 diabetes in one of our last podcasts, which, we really could add to this particular line in elder care, the dementia as a type 3 diabetes. I just read an article the other day about how important some findings have been found in other studies about what you eat. As I talked about how food can be medicine and how it can also be poison.
Yes.
I want you guys to hear me that again. Food can be poison.
Preach it. Oh, yeah.
Not going to kill you today, but could definitely do something to you within 20 or 30 years if you continually consume these products. However, we could go on a tangent and talk about tying it back to a lot of the things we've been talking about with nutritional colonialism from our very first podcast, and then how the food distribution program steps into dementia. And we're talking about elder care, and not most, but some people who are elder do start showing signs of dementia.
That's exactly right. And challenge is when you first see the first signs of dementia. That can be elusive, and trying to interpret what is just being forgetful, what is having an off day, and what would be considered pathogenic.
When we talk about mental health and strategies, right? We talked a lot about coping. That word came up in this episode, and I like the habit stacking that you all talked about in the first episode. But that kind of goes back to our routine is where we feel comfortable, and our routine is often what gets us through the mental health. Maybe it's eliminating all those decisions we have to make because it's a habit. But when these sort of things happen, we're trying to do this for longevity. Mike and I were just sitting here talking about you're doing the habits for yourself, like walking and bike riding, but you're doing them alongside your children to instill habits, but you're doing it also so you can be there with those grandchildren, right? And those grandbabies, so you can be jogging along them or running along them or riding a bike next to them. I think what's interesting about what we're trying to do and for our mental health, with our routines, with our exercise, with our nutrition, is that when these things happen within our elder community in this caregiving role, it destabilizes that. That routine goes out the window because you are in crisis response mode. Your family member, your loved one needs you, and that's what you're going to respond to. And then your body and your mind are playing catch up, right? They're wondering what's happened. And now you're on the go and you're not eating that nutritious. And then you're feeling sluggish. So what do? You might down a Red Bull or down a coffee or it just starts to compound. It snowballs so quickly. And you look up and months have gone by and you've been in this role. Or I think we all have to care for each other. When you recognize a friend, a family member, a loved one going through that, you see the stress, you may not know every detail of what they're dealing with, but reach out, see how you can help support. Maybe you're got your own thing going on, but that community, I think that's really us as Native people. It's what we've relied on as the strength of our community, not just us as individuals. That's exactly what Osage Nation is doing. These conversations that are happening within all these arenas is building that community to support, to respond, to be there, to care, and to be that safety net, to know it's always there. We're not there yet, in some of these conversations. The fact that these conversations are being had, Osage Nation, other Native nations out there, I just applaud them and their work.
Lindsay King, now of the Osage Nation, formerly from IHS, thank you so much for joining us in this conversation at the beautiful Osage Casino in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And thanks to Victor Flores for allowing us to have this opportunity here. So, Lindsay, again, thank you, and we would love to have you back someday for further conversations like the one we just had.
Thank you, Mike. I am thrilled to be a part of the Osage Nation team, thrilled to be with the health system. I so appreciate this invitation. I was sharing with you all that I have a love of podcasts, and I had a friend that turned me on to podcasts, and I never thought I would be on a podcast. So I'm still over the moon that you thought to invite me. Thank you so much. It's been an incredible conversation. I think it's always therapeutic to share even, so I appreciate that very much.
You know, Lindsay, one thing that you said just now is you were talking about nutrition and how you can get out of your routine and you can start doing bad things again. You know, Coach Kinsley would have gone off on that. She would have been all about that. Oh, yeah.
And if you love podcasts and you're into let me point you to the Fitness Fix with Coach Kinsley. I will see you later. Hey, listener, thanks for tuning in. We would very much appreciate if you hit that like button and then hit that follow button so you never miss an episode on your favorite podcast platform. Don't forget to stop by our webpage, osagehealthwatch.com, visit our Instagram at osagehealthwatch, or email the show, info@greyhawkenterprise.com. And that's Gray with an A.
Greyhawk Enterprise publishes in its individual capacity as a private enterprise and not on behalf of any administrative body within the Osage Nation. Always seek the advice of trusted, qualified healthcare providers with any questions you may have regarding any medical condition or health objective. Greyhawk Enterprise, LLC, does not endorse any specific treatment or practice over others, and we encourage listeners to make informed decisions about their health in consultation with trusted healthcare providers.
Remember, in case of a medical emergency, please contact your local emergency services immediately. If you or someone you know is struggling with thoughts of suicide, please remember that help is always available.
Call or text the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline at 988 for free, confidential support 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Osage Health Watch
is a production of Greyhawk Enterprise, LLC.